From the sandworm ride to Fade Rotha's arena sequence and the ending fight between him and Paul, there are many scenes in Denis Villeneuve's Dune Part 2 that in my opinion stand out as being classic sequences in a sci-fi film. But after multiple watches of the movie, one scene has stood out the most with its merging of performance, sound design and narrative power. The particular scene I'm talking about is the Paul Atreides arrival and speech at the Fremen War Council, a sequence that since reading the book I have anticipated seeing on the big screen. It effectively displays the turn of Paul Atreides and it plays with perspective and sound in a way that I wasn't ready for before watching it. So in this video essay, I'm going to be discussing why the speech scene in Denis Villeneuve's Dune Part 2 is a perfect moment for the film and the journey of Paul Atreides. Before I get into it though, if you want to keep up to date on any of my future content on Dune Part 2, then don't forget to support this upload by giving it a like rating, subscribing to the channel, and turning on your notifications. But without further ado, let's dive into the perfect scene from Dune Part 2. So there are many scenes in Dune Part 2 that absolutely gripped me, cinematically moved me, and made me feel the change that Paul Atreides was going through as the film progressed. The final moments with the fight between him and Fade, the unleashing of the Holy War, and Charlie's reaction to what was going on was an impactful ending that left me grappling with all the big questions that Dune deals with. Then there's Paul's sandworm ride, which on a cinematic and filmmaking level was an extraordinarily visceral sequence brought to life by the filmmaker. And then there's the arena scene with Fade Rotha, which I thought effectively introduced us to a new planet and character with alien-like visuals, a sense of the brutality that is associated with the Harkonnens, and an idea of the true purpose of Fade's character within this story. They are all unbelievable sequences that, being as good as they are, leave fans with different opinions on what the best scene actually is. But with that said, and after watching the film more than once, I can only speak for myself when it comes to what I think the best scene is. For me, one that communicates the true turn of Paul Atreides and the ultimate storytelling power of Dune Part 2 on the big screen is the character's arrival and speech at the Fremen War Council. It's a moment that needed to be done right because after seeing Paul struggle over deciding which route would be the best course of action, this sequence would be one that cements his path forward towards an emotional climax. He knows that whatever route he takes, it will lead to that holy war coming to fruition. If he goes in one of the direction of the failed paths, then it will only urge the rest of the Fremen on in his absence. And if he chooses the narrow way through, then we get what happened at the end of Part 2 with Paul unleashing the holy war himself against the Great Houses. So with him choosing that route after taking the Water of Life, the council speech needed to be a clear indicator of what was to come, and both Villeneuve's adaptation of it and Chalamet's performance in between needed to be truly engrossing. If the director's adaptation was to be effective at delivering on the core theme that Frank Herbert aims to accomplish with his original book, one that demonstrates the threat of charismatic leaders, then the final act needed to execute those ideas. And in my opinion, it was the council speech that truly delivered on this as an incredible example of making the audience feel both moved and conflicted all at the same time, using performance, sound and imagery. So coming to what happens in that scene, many would consider the actual speech by Paul as the beginning of this powerful sequence. But for me, the scene actually begins during Paul's arrival outside, as just through the use of cinematic tools, perspective, and Timothée Chalamet's performance, the audience is made to feel the big shift in the story. As Paul walks through an assembled crowd of Fremen, we instantly feel a change in tone, one that is darker and one that is imbued with a complete sense of power. To signal this shift, Villeneuve, his cinematographer Greg Fraser, his editor Joe Walker, and his composer Hans Zimmer play with individual elements of filmmaking to enhance this moment on screen. Greg Fraser presents almost religious-looking imagery when Paul arrives to make us feel his rising presence. We feel it right from the beginning with that genuinely terrifying shot of Paul's silhouette, Shai Hulud rising in frame behind him, and then also after when we get the questioning look of Fremen faces around him, not knowing what to make of him, but showing him respect nonetheless. We see Paul's foreboding figure then slice his way through the Fremen crowd, and his face veiled in shadow. It presents the turning point where Paul loses his common humanity as a prescient messiah, takes upon the mantle of Lisan al-Gaib, and commits to the holy war whatever the cost. Add on the incredible imagery from above and a further shot of Lady Jessica watching on too, and we see that Fraser wants us to feel the reaction of those around him. Yes, we do also get Anakin looking close-ups of Paul, but with a majority of the shots in this sequence being establishing frames, it makes us aware of a shift in perspective. Composer Hans Zimmer helps to communicate this change as well, replaying his recognizable music, but this time with a ripping cello and almost tribal-like drum beats. The soundtrack captures the outright ferociousness of the character's turn, and in many ways it makes us think more about the arrival of the Holy War than it does a single character turning up at a war council. So just by a change in cinematography, how that's edited together, and the way it's then elevated by Hans Zimmer's music, it means you as an audience member truly feel this moment and react to the central character slightly differently. And this brings me to the essential importance of the scene, because when we get inside the caves, they fully commit to that mentioned perspective shift. We open the speech scene with the perspective of Chani, who is trying to get Stilgar to put a stop to Paul's gaining of control through the prophecy. It's an impossible situation because she can't stop it, and even when she tries to, making her voice heard in the hall, she is silenced by those around her. Gurney Halleck is one of those in attendance, and once yanking her to the ground, he tells her that this is about revenge against the Harkonnens, who have inflicted all of their suffering. I think it's key to point out that her abandoning of the prophecy doesn't mean she's abandoning her love for Paul. She's angered that all of her people are one by one transitioning to the prophecy that the Bene Gesserit planted. Her love for Paul does remain, and I think we'll see that by the time we reach Dune Messiah, even if that film changes things in a few crucial ways. But yes, the actual speech part of this scene in the cave has essentially shifted its perspective to those for and against Paul's rise to leadership. We spend most of part 1 and a majority of part 2 coming to understand the struggles that Paul has faced through his perspective, and now we have to look on as he embraces the narrow way through. And this is where Paul enters the scene himself. He arrives at the War Council with all of the gathered Fremen, due to make a speech about that mentioned way forward. He takes control by persuading them that there is no need to eliminate Stilgar, emphasizing the importance of keeping good fighters alive. And in doing so, he poses them the question, do you destroy a weapon before a battle? So Paul leverages the Fremen's religious beliefs, portraying himself as their faultless prophet by demonstrating that he can see into the past and see everything that happens to certain individuals there. The Fremen acknowledge this by bowing to him, and he puts on his father's ducal ring, yelling that he will take them to the Great Paradise. And with Stilgar supporting this move, the Fremen unite with him in chanting Lisan al-Gaib in acknowledgement of Paul's rise to authority. He presents himself as a prophet who can do no wrong, and the Fremen see this as their opportunity to take control of Arrakis. Right from the moment where Paul yells at Stilgar that he's pointing the way, you feel that Timothée Chalamet's performance is about to go up a notch, and boy does it do that. Now that Paul can see the way, it was this moment where a performance was needed to deliver authority and present an aspect of fear as well. And the way Chalamet alters his voice from an almost whispery one at first to a now commanding one makes us truly see that. We don't just focus on Chalamet as he brings them around though, because like at the beginning of the scene, we cut to the faces of Fremen watching on, seeing how they are convinced by his new sense of leadership and his ability to see the way. By telling them that he can see the paradise in the future, they believe that this is the way forward. The scene and Chalamet's performance portray both a sense of immatchable power and yet also a shade of darkness, one that we haven't seen from Paul previously. And by ending it on the shots of Paul putting on his father's ring, declaring himself Duke of Arrakis, and playing the Atreides theme over that, this scene still maintains a level of emotion to make the audience have a true connection to it. It's not just the idea of seeing him as this dark figure that's leading the Fremen into a holy war. We are left feeling conflicted by the situation, and that is exactly what Villeneuve aimed to accomplish with his adaptation, and what Frank Herbert aimed for with this character on the page. So now that I've described why I think it's the perfect scene, I thought I would end my essay by briefly pointing out how this moment is different from the book, because I think it really showcases how Villeneuve brought it to life in his own powerful way. In Frank Herbert's book, the scene is very similar in context, but there are two small differences that make it more powerful for the cinematic language. Rather than only focusing on the news that Raban has been cut off and is now vulnerable, in the film, Paul is presented as being more direct towards the Fremen. In the book, he doesn't demonstrate to the Fremen there that he can see into individuals' past and point out examples. By doing so in the film, it helps to communicate better to them why they should follow him, and it clearly spells out to us that after drinking the water of life, Paul can now clearly see the way forward. It's a great addition that for me enhances the power of the moment and the idea of the prophecy that half of the Fremen were against at the beginning of the film. It means that he has to really persuade them and earn their trust by showcasing that he can see into their past. And the other main difference in this scene is what I kind of touched on before, in that by having the different perspective of Chani, it elevates the meaning of this moment. Her rejecting the prophecy as it unfolds isn't in the book, and a moment like this links well into enhancing her overall journey, the ending moments with her, and what that truly means for the story. By having this difference in perspective, Villeneuve is able to show the audience the looming sense of darkness surrounding Paul's upcoming quest. It's not a moment to celebrate, it's a moment to fear, and one that should create anxiety. And by having Chani be this altered perspective, it brings more intensity to the scene, and again reflects exactly what Herbert wanted audiences to get out of his Dune story. The countless interviews of him discussing how he wrote Dune Messiah to correct people's viewpoint of Paul in the original novel is something that Villeneuve took to heart in making his adaptation, and the way this scene is put together, acted and framed is a perfect example of delivering on that central message. But that was my video discussing my favourite scene from Denis Villeneuve's Dune Part 2. Through acting, cinematography, sound and writing, this scene becomes one of those moments from Part 2 that I will never forget. It only became more powerful on rewatch, and I think director Denis Villeneuve did a great job of adapting it from the book and using the moment to fuel the revenge that Paul and the Fremen would go after in the moments that followed. It's probably my second favourite scene in a film from the last few years, just behind that of the Oppenheimer victory speech scene, and I do find it quite interesting that my favourite moment from both of these films involve delivered speeches from the main characters. Both are absolutely effective, and from the individual perspective of Dune Part 2's, the execution of that scene was essential in delivering on the themes of the film's ending. But what do you think towards the speech scene in Dune Part 2, and do you agree that this is one of the standout moments from Denis Villeneuve's adaptation? Let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section, alongside your favourite scenes from the film. For much more videos and news on Denis Villeneuve's Dune universe, then subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications. Also, if you enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like rating and follow me on social media via the links in the description. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I've been Cortex, and as always, make some noise.